Hi, mining community. Welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep the Mining Podcast, the show that brings you the latest insights, thought leadership, and stories from across the global mining industry. In today's episode, we have Michael Hudson, who's the CEO of Southern Cross Gold, a TSX and ASX listed mining company who are exploring for epizonal gold in the Victorian goldfields in Victoria in Australia. Their flagship Sunday Creek project has made big strides, going from a relatively small cap explorer to a multi-billion-dollar story in just over a few years, driven by extraordinary drill results, growing institutional backing, and increasing geopolitical interest in critical minerals like antimony. But behind the headlines, there's a bigger story here, and what actually makes discovery real. How companies transition from exploration success to something more durable, and what the mining industry gets right and wrong about building the next generation of projects. So in this conversation, we're going to unpack not just about the Sunday Creek story, but the mindset behind repeatable discovery success, the realities of raising capital at scale, the challenges of developing projects in jurisdictions that aren't always eager to say yes, and a lot more. So, Michael, welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
Rob, pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, appreciate you agreeing to come on. Obviously, we've met a few times at a few of the conferences. But for those, and I imagine a lot of our audience will know you or know of you. But for those that don't, I just wanted you to tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your career, how you got into the industry, and how your career's developed to what it is today.
Yeah, sure. I'm a geologist, trained geologist, and my passion is discovery. So that is really what's driven a lot of my career. I'm a country Victorian, so I've come back to where it all started. Literally, I grew up next to Sunday Creek, our project, and fifth generation from that town. So I'm ready for it in my mid late 50s, and probably wasn't earlier in my career. I started my career and was well trained in Broken Hill, which is one of Australia's bigger underground mines, and was there for 5 or 6 years, and then a little bit around Australia. Got sent off in the mid-90s overseas and had a wanderlust to travel, so made discoveries through Pakistan and Peru, lived there for 4 years, and still working on and off there. I can't get Latin America out of my system completely. And then a lot of time, 20 years in Europe, and working through Sweden and Finland, and lots of discoveries from the periodic table, gold and lead, zinc, and rare earths, and graphite, a number of different things, and then at the start of COVID, saw the opportunities in North America, because I had 25 years in the Canadian and North American market, 7 companies I've floated across there, and saw everything that was happening in my backyard. My wife and I made the decision for the family to be based in Melbourne while I travelled, and so I'm getting on a plane doing that, and the money is coming back to Victoria from the North American market. And so I bought back into projects that I'd owned 20 plus years ago in the Victorian goldfields, and then the last 3 or 4 years has been building this asset. Sort of all come back to where it all started.
Yeah, just about to say, you obviously grew up and lived around the Sunday Creek area and the region back all those years ago. So it must be in your heart to make a success of this project, which you are, but to really go out and build and build this project, because it's got, I suppose you got a little bit more passion around it because you grew up in the area.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been a foreigner for a lot of my life, and I've loved living and working in different cultures, but ultimately you're never part of a project because you're from away, and you try and learn and how to operate and bring in key people around the project who are local. But genuinely, I can say here I am, and it's 60 kilometres from Melbourne, and we got one of the most exciting gold projects on earth, and and here we are in the backyard. So I'm either, like I joke, I'm either very smart or very slow. Taking 30 odd years to find the best gold discovery in my career was where back to where I literally just went to primary school and looked over the project.
Yeah. I wonder if you can give us a snapshot of Southern Cross Gold.
Sure. As you mentioned, it's dual listed, ASX and TSX. It's a discovery that was made under a series of old mines. The project's called Sunday Creek. It was mined from the 1870s to World War One. It is gold and antimony, 80% coming from the gold, 20% coming from antimony in terms of recoverable value. As I mentioned, it is one of the most exciting gold discoveries on Earth in terms of just the drill rate hit. You can look over the last couple of years through our news flow, and you won't see anything else like it on Earth. And we've got an exploration target out there. We put 130 kilometres of drilling into it at 2.2 to 3.2 million ounces at between basically 8.5 to 10.5 grams gold equivalent. So a multi-million ounce, 10-gram deposit is basically what we've got, and it's getting bigger. We've got 11 rigs there. We're going to 24 by the end of the year. We've got 100 people working on the project now. It's going to 200 people by the end of the year. It's just one of those magnificent things that exploration can deliver, and Victoria's done it again now with Fosterville being the best gold mine on Earth from about 18 to 21, and another key discoveries come out of this field. So it's essentially underpinned by everything that Sunday Creek is, and we're racing to take what was an exploration project now into pre-development, and we're going underground. We've been permitted to go underground with a decline. All that work's happening. So we've got lots of surface work and trucks and lots of activity. It's moved on from the simple exploration project it once was.
Obviously, you mentioned that Sunday Creek is sort of the highest grade gold antimony discovery in the Western world and possibly throughout the whole world. Um, but the market is full of projects that look great, obviously on paper, and never get built. What separates a genuinely world-class discovery from a story, and how does Sunday Creek actually stack up against that test?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So it's any discovery, it's a wall of worry that you have to get over at various points, and there's always walls of worry. So I see my job in many respects is overcoming those walls of worry and then going from one to the next. So initially, it was seen that Victoria was difficult to form modern ore bodies because it was thought everything was nuggety. But as I mentioned, Fosterville and Sunday Creek, and also another project between us, Costerfield, a very different geology than what made Victoria famous, Ballarat and Bendigo's in the 1850s. So it's those new type of deposits, and they are geologically newer. They're 70 million years younger, that make for these very economic or reconcilable deposits. That's number one. So the overwhelming weight of evidence as we put 130 kilometres into this, and that we can put detailed drilling and it stacks up and we're hitting high grade, high grade, high grade, and not just having one hit. So the continuity is demonstrated. So that wall of worry is gone. The other wall of worry is always around permitting in Victoria, because arguably it's been the worst place in Australia to permit a mine for the last 30 years. And then all of a sudden it's become, over the last couple of years, by the stats, the best place to permit a mine. 4 mines have been permitted. Our decline was permitted in 4 months, and it would have been 2 months if we were better. So the government's way ahead of us in terms of it's being systematically processing things. So there's the walls of worry, and then the mineability is now the wall of worry, and how we're going to mine it. And we're going through all that with the mining engineers, and we're very confident this will be a very productive mine, and hence going underground and demonstrating that is a key part of that aspect. So it's the overwhelming weight of data moving past that initial discovery hole, and then demonstrating that it can be a project that you can permit and actually develop. So it is momentum, and we're really running here to keep that momentum working. So, and then you can't beat just basically good geology, right? That hangs together, and that's the first principle, and then the softer side of permitting. And I suppose they're the two aspects to answer your question simply.
Yeah. And obviously you mentioned the permitting and where it took so long previously, and the last few years, things have really ramped up and permitting has been obviously approved a lot quicker. What was behind that decision? And I suppose the fundamentals as to why permitting now and the timeframes around that has just suddenly increased dramatically.
Well, there's two renaissance factors for Victoria in terms of the renaissance that we're seeing here around the gold industry primarily, or the mining industry as a whole. One is that difference, at least in geology, that the best deposits on Earth can form here and they get better at depth. And so Fosterville was first, Sunday Creek is number two. So lightning has struck twice. So that's renaissance number one, and understanding how those deposits work so we can work out where there's more of them, not only internally at Fosterville or Sunday Creek, and then perhaps more around the state. So that's number one, renaissance. Number two, and that feeds to success, right? And so people see the success and the wealth and the great jobs that come out of something like Fosterville that's been now there for a long time and employs 800 people, and Agnico's a great company. And then that leads to political success. And the local member at Fosterville is now the Premier of the state, Jacinta Allen. She knows and understands and seen mining firsthand that it can be a good industry, that it's not just a bunch of people pillaging the earth and trying to make a buck. There's genuine people trying to operate effectively and do the right thing at every point. So it's an industry that can be supported. And then, of course, the critical minerals overlay has helped hugely for society, bringing that the milk actually comes from the cow, or the antimony goes into the circuit board or whatever it may be. So people get the linkages now much better than they have for the rest of the last 30 years of my career. So it's success breeds success. It's actually understanding, having politicians who understand and leading from the very top down to create systems that work, and empowering the bureaucracy to make those decisions and knowing they can make them with the support of the leadership. So it's I've seen effective government work very well here in that respect.
This episode is sponsored by Mining International. In today's market, finding the right mining talent isn't easy. Mining International works closely with mining companies to identify and secure senior and technical professionals through a tailored search approach. If you're hiring or exploring your options, you can contact Rob Tyson via the show notes to start a conversation today.
You've gone from a $20 million market cap to approaching 3 billion in just obviously a few short years. Plus you've got 100 staff, multiple obviously drill rigs turning, and serious institutional interest. At what point does a company like Southern Cross Gold stop being an explorer and actually start being something fundamentally obviously different? And how do you manage that transition without losing what you've made you successful in the first place?
So there's two ways to create value in our business. One is market value, and that's more the hope, and that's discovery and making it bigger. And then there's fundamental value, which is converting the rock that you've discovered into economic rock, and then extracting it and for many years producing returns on investors' money. And these very high grade deposits are incredibly high margin. I mean, you look at Fosterville and the wealth that it created, and waiting to see what some of the studies that come out of this project over the next year or so are going to show. I think that's a key point. The other key point is around people. It's always around the people and how you can attract the right people through the various stages of the project. So we've gone from an R&D company, which is exploration, to now an R&D company because we're still exploring. We never stop exploring. We're putting holes, a kilometre and a half under this thing, and we've only drilled it in the first kilometre. So we're demonstrating it. It gets bigger that way. This core area that we've drilled over 1.4 kilometres actually extends, that way for
Right.
10 kilometres. So we're never stopping exploring. So we must keep that R&D. I love paying geologists to look out windows and think and to find more. But equally, then we're bringing in these engineers who are much more rigorous and systematic and have a very different culture to execute on the development and that's the push and the pull that the transition of these pre-development companies always have, and it's just finding the right people, actually, those that aren't fully feet on the brake, but equally not just foot on the accelerator, and you've got to find that right mix. And we've got a chief of staff here that I know we've spoken about because people are your business, and we've spoken a lot about how to build teams, and I thought only politicians had chiefs of staff, but you need it when you're building one of these to understand getting the right people in at the right time.
Yeah. Um, you've obviously made some major mineral discoveries across 6 countries. You've discovered Portia in South Australia, Dada in Pakistan, Beja Pulut in Finland, obviously Sunday Creek. There's probably some more as well. What does a geologist actually get right when they find a world-class deposit? And what do most people get wrong? And how? And I suppose, obviously, how about discovery when it really actually does happen?
Well, there's nothing better in life for me than getting out there and in the day, whatever day it may be, in the morning, you go out and see the drill hole that changes your life and the life of many people around a discovery. So there's nothing more thrilling than making that. And there's a lot of failures in between, if you like, and I don't see them as failures. They're learning experiences, and we can't second guess nature perfectly. But it's a wonderful career in that respect, and it's the capital markets are a terrible place to fund the business of exploration because money goes on and off through the cycle. What you really need to do is pay geologists, like I say, to look out the windows, have small dynamic teams, no more than 7 or 8 specialists ideally, and then fund them through to their concept and their idea, and don't turn dollars on and off because all that IP gets lost if you lose people. So the business of exploration, we only fund through the capital markets, but it's not necessarily the most ideal market or most ideal form to do it. And then it's always about having that humbleness to know what you don't know, but having the confidence to go for it when you've got a sense that it's there. And then the moment you start trying to prove it's not there, run a mile quickly. So it's just having the judgment in those circumstances, and you can start to see systems as they develop when you know they are special. And it's happened a number of times in my career that this is something very different, whether it's the alteration or the number of intercepts that you're getting. The first hole at Sunday Creek was a surprise on the upside, and it never really has stopped in that respect. And when you start drilling deposits out, like we're still making Sunday Creek bigger, but a lot of the infill holes are actually working and building this project. Now, if it was going the other, and that's what you want to see, it's getting better. But if it was going the other way, it would be a real lump in the throat, and that's when you want to leave quickly too. So it's at every point you're trying to de-risk it. But they say geologists who make discoveries can make more, and I sort of didn't really understand that when I was younger in my career. But I think it's just that fine sense of seeing lots of rocks, seeing when you know a mineral system is special and different, going for it. Don't listen to people around you necessarily all the time, but be humble enough to listen to people as well. So it's that fine balance that there's not one single recipe, but you've got to have the confidence to go for it, and humility to understand when you're going to be wrong, I think.
You started in underground mining back in Broken Hill back in 1990. How much does that hands-on early experience shape the way that you run like a project today? And how do you think the industry is producing enough people who actually worked at the coalface?
Yeah, so I got I got to work in the coalface and learnt from some of the best people in industry who'd learnt from some of the best people in industry. So it was a it was a wonderful training ground. I got to learn how to understand what an ore body looked like, what was really important from a mining perspective early on. So going and working as an underground geologist or a geologist in a mine, for any geologist listening in the early stages of their career is really important. The fun parts for me have been in exploration around the world through deserts and jungles and the highest mountains in the world, etc. But it's getting that fundamental base that's really important. Also, I think I hope some of that humility came from the early days when I learned that geology is not the be end and end all. I love geology. I love discovery. You know that. I've told you that a number of times already over the last 20 minutes. But it's only a part of the whole mix that creates what is economic, and having the broad skill base, I think, across geology and mining and metallurgy and environment and financing is part of that larger mix to bring a discovery from a good drill hole through to the market. You've got to have that holistic mix, and uh, that's what the training early in my career I think gave me. If I really reflect, just for the moment.
Mm. And do you think enough sort of junior geologists get enough experience in the field, whether it's in open pit mining or underground? Do you feel that they do need to have more experience from what you see in the people that the probably junior geologists that you've come across? Do you feel that majority of them do need more of that site experience, or are most of the junior geologists getting a good depth of experience being out in the field?
I'll probably give you an answer that maybe is not expected. I'd say most of the great young geologists that I know are very well trained, and that's what makes them great young geologists, because they recognise that they need to go out there and what's missing in their career. So, as an older person now, we hear that the generation below us or beyond doesn't want to go out there and do the hard yards and live in the middle of nowhere, and what we did, we did it very hard and tough. Now travel is a lot easier and you can move around a lot more, perhaps, and there's different ways of doing things. But I'd say that absolutely it's necessary, and if you think you're going to become a great geologist by looking at a computer, that is not going to happen. Of course, to become a great geologist, you need to see the rocks and mix with all those people that you'll learn from out on the coalface, so to speak. I'm reflecting on a number of the geologists. I think we've got 12 or 13 geologists in Southern Cross at the moment, going to 25 or 30. And many of them that I can think of right now have been very well trained because they want to be. And if you want to be a great geologist, you know what you need, essentially. I think it's very well recognized.
You raised over $500 million across your career. What's the single biggest mistake you see exploration CEOs make when they go to capital markets? And I suppose, what do institutional investors actually want to hear that most companies won't say?
Okay, so the biggest mistakes, well, always think about every decision you make and how it will affect the share price. That's number one, and that is should affect every decision you make in the business of exploration to build the value of the business. Don't spend high cost capital too early to drill out a resource when you should be making the system bigger, because nobody's interested in defined small things, even though every investor thinks they want a resource early. Bad mistake in my view. Getting the right investors and associating yourself with amazing people and amazing investors who understand what you're trying to do. So they understand the timeframes, the gating hurdles, whether it's going to work or not. I hate selling a share twice. I'd rather just sell it to a one person who wants to follow through, and then you're not having to sell that share again and again, which triples your work. So maybe I'm a bit lazy in that respect, but I'd rather have great shareholders. And when you get older, you can filter that out a bit better. And then it comes down to simple things. Investors really want honesty, competency. They want you to be smart and competent, but not the smartest person in the room. Just smart and you're going to make errors, but be frank about it. And then energy. I think people want you to have a very good work ethic. So if you can bring smarts with a great work ethic and be honest, I think that's a real great secret to finding those great partners to bring along in a business.
Antimony is suddenly a critical mineral story that defence departments and governments are obviously paying serious attention to. But most people in the mining industry have barely heard of it a few years ago. How did you see this coming, and what does it tell you about obviously the industry should be thinking about more commodity selection and geopolitical positioning?
Yeah, well, I probably didn't know much about antimony either, and everybody thought that it was just a problem. But if you got a lot of antimony, like we do in these kind of deposits, it becomes a real byproduct. Uh, I, I suppose all these minor elements we used to call small markets. Now we call them critical metals because we gave them away and lost them. I'm very thankful that Sunday Creek has 80% gold and 20% antimony. I would not like to have an antimony deposit in isolation, only because I've failed many times in my career with, I think we found the world's largest dysprosium deposit. We put a mine into production that produced a sixth of Europe's graphite. And every one of those assets failed at the time. We got one of Europe's larger cobalt deposits. They all fail because they're up against a great and smart competitor, being China, who has a very low cost of capital, controls the midstream, and then controls the pricing. And they can put the price up or they can put the price down as they see. And being in a small market is not a place to be when you're exposed to that price risk. So I'm very thankful that this mine has 80% gold backing a critical mineral. It is genuinely a very large antimony asset, Sunday Creek, in the Western world. But it's never going to be at risk in isolation because it's backed by that 80% gold. So I'd say stick to the major commodities if you want an easier life. Go into the specialty metals if you want a complicated life in smaller metals is probably my harsh judgment. And if you want to find a critical metal, try and have it as a byproduct to a commodity that's commonly traded on markets and has greater price transparency, like the base metals or gold.
Victoria has a complicated history with obviously mining regulation and community opposition. You're operating 60 k's from Melbourne in a jurisdiction that has permitted a new underground mine in decades. What does it actually take to get a mine built in a place that doesn't want one? And is the industry handling community relations well or badly from your view?
Well, I think Victoria really didn't want mining for a long part of the last 30 years, but certainly it wants mining today. And we spoke a bit about that in terms of the change of leadership and that realization of countries need, from their own sovereignty point of view, need to have their own supply chains secured. And now that's even been heightened even more with the whole oil shock, of course, which feeds, that we've seen in the critical metal space for the last 5 to 10 years. So Victoria certainly does want mines today. Social license is mission critical. It really is. And those who work for me know that I place a huge amount of importance on getting that right. You'll never keep everybody happy. That's one thing I never, as a younger person, I was much more idealistic and I tried to keep everybody happy. But as long as you've got the vast majority of people happy and the vast majority of reasonable people happy, and you've got all the different levels of society understanding what you're doing, from the people who live around the project to the broader population around the project to the local politicians and the council to the state to the federal politicians to all your suppliers to all your employees to all their the family, and you're very genuine and and you talk about your project at every level and not keep it black box, and say what you're going to do. Say what you're going to do, I think, is the key message. Then you've got a half a chance. You won't always have that support, and if you haven't got that top level support, if a state or a jurisdiction doesn't want mining, go elsewhere. Go and spend your money elsewhere, because you'll lose this, which I have in places. So it's picking the places that want you, and in fact, at the granular level, we own 3,500 acres now of land ourselves, freehold land over our project and beyond. So we've secured that access and development opportunity. But in the early days, when you're exploring, you can't go and buy land everywhere. And we say to landholders, if you want us to come on, because we can't go, we've got the right to explore, but we can't go onto land without having the right of the surface landholder giving us approval. And we say, if you don't want us there, we're not coming. We'll go and look for it elsewhere, because life is too short again. So it's finding those partnerships where people understand what you're trying to do, and there's an agreement. If people don't want you there, then at that early stage, once you start a mine, it becomes a bit more complex, and you can't move that, and you've got to work with what you've got.
Yeah. And lastly, and to summarise, what's the outlook, say, over the next 6 to 12 months for Southern Cross Gold? And is there anything else you want to share with our audience?
No, it's been an interesting time again, Rob. You deal with people and you know how to get into their heads. So thank you. Before we finish up, but the next 6 to 12 months is we're going to go to our first maiden resource, which will be substantial in Q1 next year, and then the first economic studies in Q2. We'll have finished the decline by the end of the year, this calendar year. And 24 rigs will be one of the biggest, if not the biggest, drill out globally. So there's going to be so much more to come in terms of pulling this together and making it bigger. It's already one of the key discoveries globally, and it's really at the start of its discovery rather than its end point. And so I'm just looking forward to executing on all that and working towards making this one of the highest margin projects on Earth.
Michael, really appreciate your time. I know how busy you are, so I really, really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. Want you to obviously come on the podcast either later this year or next year to give us an update on how the progress has gone. And obviously wish you well for the remainder of this year. And it's an exciting project. I heard you speak in Toronto, and that's why I wanted you to come on the podcast. And it's a great project, and wish you well and every success for the remainder of the year. And we'd love you to come back on the podcast and give us an update, maybe in 6 or 12 months' time.
Let's do it, Rob. Take care.
Yeah. And also, if our audience wants to obviously follow the story and obviously news releases, how can they go about doing that? And what social media platform channels are you on?
Well, look at our website, southerncrossgold.com or .com.au. Both websites work, and we're on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter under various handles that you'll see on the website.
Yeah, and we'll include these in the show notes to accompany this episode. So all the best, Michael, and we will speak soon.
Thanks, Rob.
No worries. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Look, what a great episode. Explorer, got discovery, and now hopefully turning it into a mine over the next sort of coming years. It's a great story. Obviously, Victoria Goldfields, they're making headways now across the world, where some of the projects in Victoria are world class. So really appreciate you listening to the episode. Please keep supporting these and sharing these episodes far and wide, and to obviously educate our mining industry. So thank you again for listening. And until next time, happy mining.